Minister, I just want to thank you for taking this motion, and I know we delayed it for a week so that you could, but I appreciate that you are going to be here for the motion. And I suppose it's a short motion. There's a number of asks, and I want to deal with the first one, which is on cost of childcare. So many families are still paying very high costs. And as a result of those high costs, some are choosing not to return to work because it isn't actually worth the while, and that primarily affects women. Not always, but primarily. And I mean, I hear families still paying, depending on where they are in the country, up to $1,500 a month. I think the average is $800, which is still high. It's like a second mortgage. And you know, high costs are a barrier to formal childcare. They're a barrier to female labour market participation. They see an increase in child poverty. And last year, probably just prior to the alternative budget, we announced that in Sinn Féin we would advocate for a €10 per day per child in childcare. And this was something that was taken up by Fianna Gael and I think Fianna Fáil as well, and that's to be welcomed. And I know it was something that was in election manifestos, I think, by all the main parties. However, there were no reductions in this budget towards the cost of childcare. And I mean, it's something I thought would have started at least in this budget, and something that will be continued over the next few years to reduce the cost. Now, I mean, it's more challenging for families who are on a lower income or for lower parents to access childcare when the costs are significant. And while I will acknowledge there have been subsidies and there has been reductions, it doesn't actually benefit all of the families. And some countries like Norway and Finland in particular, they have led the way where, you know, they have had a publicly led childcare system, and that has seen cost to parents fall dramatically. And I think it's something that we should be looking at in this country as well. I would note that there are a number of private operators who are not in core funding, and therefore the families who are accessing those services are not benefiting from the reductions that they get through the National Childcare Scheme and core funding. And I'm just wondering, what are the barriers, or what can we do to ensure that all private operators are brought on board? And I know some were in core funding and left it, and some of it's to do with the bureaucracy involved, or the fact that fees were frozen while they were still quite low. Childminders as well. Some parents choose to have their children minded by a childminder, and while they cannot access core funding, a lot of them are not accessing the National Childcare Scheme. I think there's under 150 registered nationally, and again is to examine why that is and how we can bring more childminders on board in relation to that, so that we can reduce fees. Now, last year, I suppose, throughout the election campaign, the then Taoiseach Simon Harris would have made continuous references to public childcare model and being a key priority if Fine Gael were returned to government. Now, the programme for government seems to have stepped away from this, and I know it instead commits the government to undertake a broad consultation and publish a detailed action plan to build an affordable, high-quality, accessible early childhood education and add state-led capacity where needed. But I don't think that consultation has started. Maybe you could update us on that, Minister, because I'm not aware of anything having begun on that, and I think it does need to begin as soon as possible. But I really would urge the government to look at the public model and investigate it. I'm not saying it's a simple rolling out case. There are different models in different countries that could be looked at and maybe ideas received. But I mean, if you have a public model of childcare, which includes early education and after-school care, it will deliver affordability for parents and for families, and it will give sustainability to providers, but it also will give quality for children and staff. And when we look at our early educators here, I think at the last wage increase, they are on €15 per hour. Now, the national minimum wage is due to rise in January to $14.50. That means that our early educators, who some have level 7 and level 8 degrees, are only receiving 0.75 cent per hour more than the national minimum wage. I really do think that we need to look at a better pay for our early educators. Many of them are leaving the sector, and that is one of the issues with the capacity, which I'll deal with more later. But they are leaving and they're going on into teaching, or they're going into schools at SNAs. And we need highly qualified personnel within our childcare model to ensure that we deliver the quality that our children need. A public model of childcare will guarantee access and quality and affordability in every community. So I want to see every child be able to access a fair, ensure that every child gets fairness in the childcare model that they're looking at, regardless of the parents' income or regardless of their address. So that I want to see every child accessing high quality early childhood education and care. It is achievable, as I referenced. Other countries are doing it, and we need to look at that and ensure that we are delivering it here as well. That we have a public healthcare system, for example. It mightn't always work as we want it to work, but it is there and it works pretty well in most cases. We also have a public education system, and I mean that works really well. So I think we need to model our early childhood education on that. It will mean long-term planning. It's not going to happen overnight. We need to look at, capital planning for areas where there's need. We need to integrate better with our schools and with our community services and with our local authorities. I think we also need to embed Irish medium provision as a core element within our early childhood education. Also ensuring outdoor play and inclusivity in all of them as standard. And just recognising early years as part of our public education continuum, okay? Because I think if you invest in childcare, you're investing in children, you're investing in equality, and you're investing in a future economy. And like every euro spent on quality early education will return multiple times in social and economic benefits in the years to come. In relation to, as I mentioned, capacity there, and we know that there are issues around capacity, and in some cases it's shortage of physical space, and in other cases it's shortage of staff. I suppose there's a building block scheme, right, which is a very good scheme, but it's for existing providers to extend their premises or to buy or to build new buildings, right? Could this not be extended to existing providers and indeed new providers in the system to extend to include existing buildings? We have a huge level of vacancy, especially in our towns and villages. And what better place to put our childcare facilities than embedded in a village or in a town? And these buildings already constructed, some of them are not in bad condition, and they could easily and very quickly be turned around to be suitable for the provision of early education, and I think it would be a much faster solution. I know in the budget there was a talk about extending schools and community centres, and as former Minister for Education, I mean, there are schools out there waiting for additional classrooms where they are really, really urgently needed, and yet they're left waiting years for those to progress through the building section of the department. We need classrooms for children with additional needs, and they can't be educated locally because those classrooms and that space isn't available. So I can't see how that's going to address the capacity issues that currently exist. Now, just in relation to, there was a motion or an amendment submitted to the motion by Senator Kine, and part of the motion says to acknowledge that there continues to be evidence of some families having difficulty finding appropriate places at a cost that is affordable. We have 40,000 children on waiting lists. How can you say that there's only some families? It's a huge waiting list. The costs I've already referenced, nothing was done in the budget about the costs for families. Nothing was done in the budget about pay for educators. We need to see those issues tackled, as well as the capacity issue, in order to ensure that every child has an opportunity to avail of early childhood education, and that our parents are able to return to work after maternity leave and aren't coming in, as they are coming into my constituency office, in tears because they can't go back to work and they have to stay at home and look after the children because they cannot find a suitable childcare model. So I'll let my colleague in now, Cathaoirleach, thank you for that.